Like a log in bed. My husband was fond of saying that, usually to his family, usually when my back was turned. He'd raise his beer bottle at the family barbecue as if making a toast, and they would all laugh. But on his birthday, I finally told them the truth about why we hadn't been intimate. When his mother saw the proof, she nearly fainted. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you to like this video to help it reach more people. Thank you. And now enjoy the story. I've heard a lot of things in my life, but some words cut through the air like a sharp, cold knife. She laughs more at funerals than she does in our bedroom. That was Julian, son of a respected family, raising his beer bottle by the grill as if making a toast. He said it to his family, his mother, Margaret, his father, Victor, his sister, Emma, and their friends, everyone gathered at the Levin family's estate in the Hamptons. And they all laughed. Margaret, with her perpetually refined smile. Victor, with a broad hand on his son's shoulder. Emma, whispering something to her husband, Timothy. Everyone. Everyone except for me, Barbara Levin, my name now a hollow echo of who I used to be. I was standing there, holding a platter of appetizers, and my fingers trembled. Not from the weight of the platter, but from the weight of that laughter, the kind that isn't shared with you but directed at you. I placed the platter on a table on the terrace and quietly slipped into the kitchen, the way you leave a room that has suddenly become suffocating. I was 33. I had honey-colored hair and green eyes that used to look at the world with a direct, bold gaze. Now I moved as if I were afraid of disturbing the air, God forbid, of bothering anyone. The house was cool inside. The smell of dill and grilled meat wafted in from the window, and in that coolness, for a moment, it was easier to breathe, as if the heat and humiliation had been left outside. Need a hand, dear? Margaret's voice always entered a room half a step ahead of her. It was syrupy sweet, but beneath the sweetness was a fine, sharp needle. At 58, she was still a striking woman. Her silver hair was impeccably styled, her dress expensive and tasteful. She always reminded me that Julian came from a proper family, one that knew how to keep up appearances. Thank you, I'm fine, I said evenly and focused on a simple, understandable task. Arranging deviled eggs on a platter, making sure each one was perfectly aligned like a little soldier. When everything around you is falling apart, you cling to the small things. In them there is order. You know? Margaret leaned against the countertop. I was just reading a fascinating article about how to spice up a marriage. I can send it to you, she said in the same tone one might use to recommend a recipe for apple pie. The spoon in my hand scraped slightly against the edge of the bowl. No, thank you, I replied just as evenly. A man has needs, you know, my mother-in-law continued as if I hadn't spoken. And if he can't get what he needs at home, he'll look for it elsewhere. A pause hung in the air, like storm clouds before a downpour. I glanced out the window. Julian was now telling another story, waving his arms dramatically. Victor clapped his son on the back so hard that the glasses on the table trembled. Father and son, cut from the same cloth. They always had each other's backs. I'll keep that in mind, I said, picked up the platter and walked past Margaret. Those words had become my automatic armor. In 2 years with the Levins, I had learned to answer briefly, so as not to give them an opening to turn the conversation against me. Outside, Julian immediately caught my eye. Ah, here's my beautiful wife. Barbara, tell everyone how you... He paused, and the audience prepared to laugh. How you organize our private life. With quarterly reports. And presentations, Emma chimed in. And performance reviews. And again the laughter. I placed the platter down carefully, as if I were setting down an explosive and was afraid of striking a match. You've had enough to drink, Julian, I said quietly. See? He leaned back in a stage whisper for the whole table to hear. Always in command. It wasn't always like this. When we met 3 years ago at a corporate event, I was representing my consulting firm. He had come with his marketing department. Julian was attentive, witty, and very persuasive. He courted me beautifully. Dinners at fancy restaurants, spontaneous weekend getaways, conversations about dreams and ambitions until midnight. The change didn't happen all at once, but like water seeping into a crack. First jokes that I was too serious, then annoyance with my work schedule. And after the wedding, targeted comments, sometimes with a smile, sometimes in front of everyone, so that any objection from me would look like hysteria. Some women just don't understand what a man needs, Emma said sympathetically, placing a hand on her brother's shoulder like a prize. A tightness spread through my chest, the familiar precursor to a panic attack that I had learned to suppress. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8, as my therapist, whom no one here knew about, had taught me. For 6 months I had been going to therapy, convinced that I was the one who needed to be fixed. Excuse me. I stood up and walked away. And what hurt the most was that no one noticed. In the guest bathroom, I leaned my hands against the cool tiles by the sink. In the mirror, a woman I barely recognized stared back at me. Where had the woman who built a career with precision and clarity, who cut through the unnecessary, who understood the complex as if it were simple, gone? When had I started to believe the story they had invented about me? My phone vibrated in my pocket. A work email. Even on a Saturday, I stayed connected. My job at Westwood Capital Finance had become my refuge. There, they valued numbers, they valued my contribution. There, no one called me cold if I double-checked a report. Julian had tried to extend his influence even there, saying things like, "You're compensating with your career for what's lacking at home." Another vibration. A text from Julian. "Where are you?" "Mom's serving dinner." I looked into my reflection's eyes and my lips formed a whisper. This can't go on. I didn't know then how right I was, or that in less than 24 hours, I would see something that would shatter their carefully constructed family legend into a million pieces. At the dinner table, Victor, as was customary, launched into stories about Julian. Even in school, he'd say, he could talk his way out of anything, wrap the principal around his little finger. And everyone would laugh as if it were a talent, not a circumvention of the rules. I sat upright, cutting my meat into identical, precise pieces. It was a gesture I recognized in myself. When everything inside is roaring, you hold on to order on the outside to the straight edge. Emma was buried in her phone. "Barbara, I sent you a link. A book. How to Make Your Man Happy. It's really insightful. You'll find it useful." My phone vibrated, but I didn't reach for it. I just continued to arrange the pieces of meat on my plate, as if I were reassembling myself from small, neat parts. "Always so focused," Julian observed. "She even eats like she's in a strategy session." The laughter rippled around the table again. And at that moment, you know how it is? Something inside me quietly clicked. A layer shifted. And I thought, not out loud but just on a breath, what if the problem isn't me at all? Monday arrived, as all inevitable things do. The alarm was still silent when I woke up. I quietly slipped out of the bedroom, the coffee maker whirred to life with a familiar hum. Through the large windows, Manhattan was beginning to light up. This large new apartment, almost 3,000 square feet of glass and stone, with a view of the city center, didn't whisper cozy, it screamed status. A status that was financed by debt, stretched to its absolute limit. "The view is the most important thing," Julian had said when he was convincing me to buy it. And at the first family dinner, he had bragged about the square footage as if it were his own achievement, not a shared liability. "You're up early." Julian appeared in the kitchen doorway, fit, handsome, the way he knew how to be, like a movie poster. "Busy week." I poured him a cup of coffee, also a gesture of truce. "I have a client dinner on Wednesday," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Try to wear something less corporate." "Okay." I swallowed my reply. Arguing would only give him ammunition. "Mom called," he continued. "She asked if you'd looked at the book Emma sent. You know, they're just trying to help. Don't be so defensive." "I have to get ready. I have a 9 o'clock meeting." I turned to the cupboard so he wouldn't see the flash of anger in my eyes. "Convenient," he said flatly, running away from the conversation. 40 minutes later, I was sitting in my office at Westwood Capital Finance. Floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of the city, folders with departmental budgets. My assistant, Michael, appeared at the door. "The budget committee is ready." Conference Room A. I'm on my way, Michael. I conducted the meeting as I always did. Calmly in detail without any fuss. At the end, George Westwood, the CEO, smiled. Excellent as always, Barbara. Your third quarter analysis is exactly what we needed. I nodded, but inside I felt a void. The praise that used to warm me now only highlighted the contrast. Here I was strong and understood. At home I was too proper. In my office, my gaze fell on our wedding photograph. 2 years ago. She was bright, he was pleased, not yet tired of his own role. My phone blinked, transferring my half for the mortgage to the joint account. I frowned. The payment had already been made. Last Thursday. I had done it myself as always. I typed back, paid on Thursday. The dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. Right. Forgot. There was something wrong with that. Not the word, but the shadow of the word. But the day went on. Meetings, emails, signatures. In the evening, when the office had quieted down, I, without really planning to, opened my online banking app. To check and to reassure myself. I was not reassured. The balance in our joint account was lower than it should be. Significantly lower. I opened the transaction history and now professionally, without emotion, I went through the lines. Several transfers to unfamiliar digital wallets. Regular debits to some services with smooth, anonymous names, the kind of packaging that is often used to hide something dirty. I exported everything to a spreadsheet, marked the dates, amounts, descriptions. The administrator in me took over, and the wife felt a little better. As long as you're building columns and rows, you have a foundation. The phone rang. Julian. I'm going to be late, he said calmly. A client meeting ran long. We're going for a drink after. Which client? I asked before I could decide if I should. A pause. Horizon Media. Why? I knew all his projects. He himself demanded that I remember the names and companies. Horizon Media was not on the list. Nothing. Good luck, I replied and hung up before he could diagnose my tone. The lines in the spreadsheet were forming a pattern. Amounts, dates, frequency. A couple of hours later, the picture was clear. It wasn't just a few random expenses, it was a leak. A hemorrhage. In 6 months, about $50,000 had gone to online gambling platforms. Another significant amount to subscriptions with innocent-sounding names, which, with a simple search, turned out to be adult entertainment sites. I leaned back in my chair, sat quietly, listening to my heart beat. And it was beating not with pain anymore, but with anger as clean and cold as ice. I closed my laptop, stood up, and suddenly decided to do something I would have never thought of before. If he was lying about the meeting, where was he then? It was easy to get a taxi. I gave the driver the address of the Northern Palace, the hotel in the city center where business dinners were often held. The receptionist smiled, checked her database again. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any events under that name tonight. And no Horizon Media either, the administrator added, seeing my expression. They have a conference in a month. I see. Thank you, I said. And everything became not clearer, but more sober. Outside, the air was cool for a summer evening. I pulled up my collar and thought calmly and firmly, tomorrow morning after he leaves, I'm going into his study. I don't want to live with guesses anymore. I want to know. We women are often ashamed of our own questions. But there was nothing to be ashamed of anymore. The money was disappearing, the truth was hiding, and someone else's confidence in their own impunity was growing like a weed, if you don't pull it by the root. The taxi took me home. The lights floated past the window, and in each light, I saw someone else's story. Somewhere up there on other people's balconies, they were either telling the truth or continuing to hide it. I went up to the empty apartment, turned on a floor lamp, and sat on the edge of the sofa, looking at the view from the windows that had always been Julian's main argument. Then I went to bed. Not to sleep, of course, but to lie there and listen to the water hissing in the neighbor's pipes, and to wait for the lock to click. Would he return in his usual role, with a ready explanation just in case? Or would he not return at all? In the morning, everything would be by the clock. His 12-minute shower, 10 minutes of hairstyling, a piece of toast, coffee, the news, and at 7:30 the door. I would wait another 10 minutes so as not to, God forbid, run into him in the hallway, and I would go into his study, to the mahogany desk, to the drawers where there was always emptiness and correctness. And there was still ahead. And because of that, I was breathing evenly like before a jump. You've already pushed off, you're flying, and you don't know what you'll find with your hands. When the door clicked shut behind Julian at 7:32 a.m., I waited a good 10 minutes more. The silence had to settle. And then I went into his study. Everything was as usual. The large mahogany desk, neat folders, a straight line of pens like a display case. The top drawers, trifles, cables, paper clips, business cards. And in the bottom right, under a stack of thick folders, was another laptop, old, scratched. You don't hide something like that for no reason. I opened the lid. Password. A pang of guilt. I'm snooping. But next to it stood the numbers from my spreadsheet from yesterday. And that was more important than propriety. I tried his birthday. Denied. Our wedding date. Denied. The street he grew up on. Also a miss. I sat back, looked around. On a shelf, a small trophy with the inscription, Marketing Case Championship Champion 2012. I smiled without joy and typed Case Champ 2012. The screen went dark for a moment, and then the desktop opened. From there it was like reading a report. The browser history. Everyday poker, sports betting, online casinos. And between them, platforms with innocent names that, with a single search, opened up to explicit content. The password manager showed over a dozen accounts on gambling sites. Subscriptions to adult content. Forums where he spent hours. The email. Letters about transfers, about topping up accounts. VIP level now available to you. Correspondence with support over disputed charges. And in a separate folder, finances, statements for accounts I didn't know existed, loans, cash withdrawals at exorbitant interest rates. And there correspondence with a certain Marcus, the vulture thorn. Subject. Payment schedule options. The last letters were harsh without any niceties. Final notice. 500,000 by the end of the month, or we will escalate. You know the terms. I pressed my forehead into my palm, then exhaled and continued. The documents for our apartment. And there it was, the sheet that made an icy lump in my chest turn over. A payday loan company. Quick cash. A lien against our apartment. The amount was around $150,000. My signature was not on it, and it couldn't have been. On top of that, there was about $50,000 in credit card debt on 6 different cards I had never heard of. The screen flashed with a calendar reminder. Dr. Andrew Harrison, 2 p.m. I opened the calendar. The same appointments every week for the past 4 months. I searched his email by the name. Confirmation letters for appointments and also brief session summaries. I froze. It would have been more ethical to close it and walk away. But next to it lay our apartment under a lien and a threatening letter for $50,000. I opened one. There were dry lines, not psychology for the general public. Patient continues to externalize responsibility, describing his wife as cold and controlling. When presented with facts about his own problematic patterns, projection and resistance are the main obstacles. My eyes stung, not with pity, but with anger and a strange sense of relief. For 6 months I had been treating my coldness, while he was treating his addiction and simultaneously blaming everything on me. From then on, I worked with my hands as I know how. I took screenshots of the bank statements, the letters from Marcus Thorne, the subscriptions, the list of accounts, the lien documents. I saved them to a separate folder, sent them to my personal email address, double-checked that it went through, and only then did I close the session, carefully clear the recent files, shut down the laptop, and put it back in the same corner under the same folders with the same gap as it was before. My phone quietly pinged with a reminder of my morning call with a client. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, leaned my hands on the countertop, and said to myself out loud, without pity and without pathos, I will not live with guesses anymore. The call went almost on autopilot. My voice was confident, the numbers were clean. My thoughts were on their own path. how to protect myself, how to separate, what to do with the money. By lunchtime, the decision had taken its full shape. That evening, I would talk to him. Not about feelings, but about facts. About the debt, about the lien, about the subscriptions, about the lies. I would offer help, if he said yes to treatment and to putting the finances under control. And if not, then I would get up and walk away alone, saving myself. We often think that a choice is something big and loud. But it's like this, quiet but irreversible. I closed my bag, checked that the phone with the copies was in a safe place, called a car and went to the office. I walked through the lobby, lighter than yesterday. When you know the truth, you walk straighter. I didn't know yet that Julian would leave work early, go to see Marcus Thorne to try to get an extension, come home angry and nervous, and notice that his secret laptop was a millimeter out of place, and that the phone in her office would ring at the most inopportune moment. At 3:15 p.m., Michael appeared at my door, cautious, as if he were carrying a hot cup. "Barbara, your husband is on line 1. He sounds angry." I picked up the phone, already knowing what I would hear. "You were in my computer." Julian's voice was even, and that made it cold. "We need to talk." "Not on the phone," I said. "Right. I'm at home." Click. Silence. I sat for a few seconds to let my breathing even out, put my papers in a folder and took my bag. In the lobby under the glass ceiling, I suddenly felt light. When you know the truth is in your hands, your step is lighter. The drive flew by like a silent movie. The bridge, the cars, the traffic lights. In the apartment, the silence was not cozy but wary. The air conditioner hummed monotonously. Outside, the city roared in the distance. I clicked the ceramic bowl by the door, a light chime, and without taking off my coat, I said, "Julian." He came out of the hallway, leaning against the wall as if casually. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, his hair disheveled by his hands. The same small signs by which we women read other people's moods better than any test. "How long have you been spying on me?" he asked quietly. I wasn't spying. I put my bag on the dresser and went into the living room, where there was more space and distance. I was defending myself, by violating my privacy, by going through my things. He didn't raise his voice, but his jaw was working. "And you into our money, into our apartment, and into my head," I said just as evenly. "And let's skip the niceties. I found the second laptop. I found the betting, the subscriptions, the transfers. I found the letter from Marcus Thorne. 50,000 by the end of the month. I found the lien on our apartment with quick cash for 150,000, without my signature. And I saw your calendar. 4 months every week with Dr. Andrew Harrison." Something flickered across his face. Not shame, not anger, and it was gone. He went to the bar, poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon. His hand was barely trembling. "You had no right," he said to my back. "And you had no right to put me at risk for your debts." I endured the pause. "And to make me a convenient story for your family. For 2 years you've been joking about my coldness, while you yourself were spending 4 hours a day on adult websites." He turned and his gaze was hard as glass. "What do you want, Barbara? Money, the apartment, a divorce?" "I want the truth," I replied without any theatrics. "To understand where we are and how to get out of this. I am willing to help if you admit the problem, go into real therapy, and put the finances under control. Without your I'll handle it myself." He smiled that familiar, crooked smile. "Always like this. Love according to your regulations. Even our marriage is a project for you." "Stop it," I said quietly. "This isn't about regulations. It's about safety. Mine and yours." He put the glass down evenly as if testing his strength. "Do you think you're the only smart one in this house?" His voice became softer, and therefore more dangerous. "You're getting into things you don't understand." "I understand just fine," I held his gaze. "At least the numbers. And I also understand that as long as you don't understand, we have Marcus Thorne on our necks with a deadline." "Did you contact him?" Sharply. "No. I read the letters," I replied. "And at first I wanted to talk calmly." He snorted. "Calmly? You broke into my computer, checked my accounts. I froze our joint accounts and cards, I added calmly. I transferred my personal savings to a place where you have no access. And I went to a lawyer about the lien without my consent. His face turned gray. He took a step closer. What? I'm defending myself, Julian. What I should have done a long time ago. He took another step, invading my personal space. The smell of alcohol, expensive cologne, nerves. Do you realize what you've just done? I need money for work. I need any legal expenses through me. Until we sort this out. I didn't back down. And we both know it's not about work. You're taking too many liberties, he said, almost in a whisper. And the goosebumps were stronger than from a scream. Playing the boss at home? I'm not playing. I'm living. And I want to live without lies, I replied. Tell me honestly, are you ready to get help? Ready to stop shifting the blame to me and pretending that I'm the problem? He was silent for a long time, turned away to the window to their view, which he clung to like a picture from an advertisement for a better life. When he spoke, his voice was strained. I didn't want it to get this big. I believe you, I said calmly. But intentions don't cancel facts. We have debts, we have a lien, we have lies. We need a financial consultant, a treatment program, marital therapy. For real, not just for show at Dr. Harrison's. And if I don't want to, he turned around, then I'm filing for divorce and protecting myself legally, I said, and was even surprised at how simple it sounded. He gave an empty laugh. Always so clinically correct. Do you even love me, Barbara? Or are you just getting rid of a bad asset? For 2 years I tried to be convenient, I replied. I listened to your jokes in front of your parents. I was silent under their advice. I went to a therapist thinking I was broken. And I'm still standing in front of you offering help. If that's not love, I don't know what is. For a second, something alive flickered in his eyes. As if the guy from the corporate party was looking out from behind the glass again. But he immediately hid behind his usual mask. It's not as simple as you make it sound. Quietly. I'm not saying it's simple, I sighed. But we can't go on like this. He suddenly sank onto the sofa. Heavily. I need to think. Think, I nodded. But there's not much time. According to the letter, you have less than 2 weeks. And you've cut everything off. For the first time, fear crept into his voice. Do you realize you've made things worse? A cold current ran down my spine. Then explain. Who is this thorn? What's worse? Julian ran a hand over his face. He's not someone you argue with. If there's no money, we'll solve this legally, I interrupted. Through a lawyer, through the police if necessary. He stood up abruptly. I need some air. Already at the door, keys in hand, he turned, as if remembering who he was in this story. The master of the situation. Dinner at my parents' on Saturday. My birthday. No one is canceling that. Be there at 7. And Barbara, don't even think about making a scene. Wear something decent. The door closed dryly and too loudly like a blank shot. I was left in the silence where you could hear the old wall clock ticking. It always keeps better time than our plans. My phone blinked. A message from Emma. Don't forget to order the cake for Saturday. Chocolate nut, his favorite. And I sent you that book. It really helps. I looked at the screen, and something simple and very firm was building inside me. I went to the table, opened the folder with the copies, checked again that everything was saved. The statements, Thorne's letters, the lien, the subscriptions. I closed it and put it in my bag along with the small flash drive. And looking at the evening city behind the glass, I thought in a calm voice as if stating a diagnosis. If they want the truth, they'll get it. And then in a silence so profound you could hear the refrigerator hum. The lock on the door clicked. The lock clicked, and he walked in as if nothing had happened. He took off his shoes, placed them neatly. He went to the bedroom. The water in the shower started running as usual. And from this ordinary sound, it was strange how this life could pretend to be ordinary when everything inside you had already shifted. At night, he lay next to me in silence. In the morning, he drank his coffee in silence. At the table, our eyes met, and again, that same empty politeness with which people cover an abyss like a carpet. The next few days passed as if in slow motion, each in their own orbit, with business-like phrases and nothing extra. I worked precisely and quickly, and in the evenings I pieced together the picture bit by bit. I made calls, took notes, asked questions. On Wednesday, I was sitting across from a financial consultant, a middle-aged man, calm with that professional face that doesn't show everything. I told him what I had found on that old laptop. The statements, the lien, the letters from Marcus Thorne. "Show me the documents from Quick Cash," he asked. And when I unfolded the copies, I saw his expression change ever so slightly. "This isn't a second mortgage," he said cautiously, choosing his words. "This is a loan against a loan. Essentially a microfinance product with predatory interest rates. And without your signature if you're a co-owner, this is grounds for a lawsuit." He went through the pages, sometimes pausing, making notes. "As for the cards," he continued, "your husband has about 50,000 in total across 6 banks. The terms vary, the rates are high. From the statements, I see regular debits to gambling platforms. And this," he held up the letters from Thorne, "50,000 by the end of the month. I don't like the tone of this correspondence. What should I do first?" I asked, and my voice didn't tremble. "Protect yourself. A separate account, freezing the joint cards. You've already done that, and you were right. Immediately see a lawyer about the lien and the forged signature. And," he looked at me directly, "be prepared for this to be about more than just money. It always is." On Friday, I went to see my therapist, Dr. Elise Vance. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and briefly, in a businesslike tone, recounted the week. Dr. Vance listened, sometimes nodding, without interrupting. And then she asked, not directly, "What do you hope to achieve by showing his family the truth?" "Not applause," I replied. "For them to stop pretending that I'm the problem. So that Julian no longer has a stage for his jokes. So that I have a foundation of facts. Not endless, you're cold. And if that foundation doesn't appear, then I'll still have myself," I said. "And that's enough for me now." I left feeling lighter than when I had arrived. And in the evening, when Julian came home late again and lay down on the very edge of the bed like a stranger, I didn't say anything, didn't try to find the right tone. I just opened my laptop in the living room and organized the truth into folders. Bank statements, cards, the lien, the correspondence with Thorne, the confirmation of his appointments with Dr. Harrison, excerpts from the letters. All in one catalog. A copy on a small flash drive. The flash drive in an inner pocket of my bag. I double-checked the phone's screen mirroring function, so there would be no hiccups at the crucial moment. At that moment, a message from Margaret arrived. "Barbara, dear, remember, you look best in blue for family photos. And we've invited Timothy Sterling. Victor wants to talk to him about the Sterling Capital business. And then, be here at 7 p.m. sharp. Don't be late." A tone as if the world was standing still as it always had. I looked at it and put the phone down without replying. Another one from Emma. "Don't forget to order the cake. Chocolate nut, his favorite. And I sent you that book. It helps. Really helps." Who and from what? I thought. Not angrily anymore, but almost with surprise, as at a stranger's medicine for a stranger's illness. Saturday was sunny, as if in defiance. The air was warm, dry, the leaves were still full, and people were walking in the park as if they didn't have a single terrifying envelope rustling inside them. I walked my usual route, watching the runners and the dogs, and thinking not about what I would say. I already knew that, but about how to do it calmly, so that not a single gesture of mine could be written off as hysteria. I got home around noon. Julian was singing in the shower. The sound of his singing was chilling like a false note. I turned my preparations into an almost ritual. Hair, makeup without any excess, the earrings my parents had given me. An emerald green dress, not blue as Margaret liked. The emerald brought out the depth of my eyes. In my bag, the phone with the folder, the flash drive, the documents, a handkerchief, powder, the little things you hold on to like railings on a staircase. He was already standing by the door when I came out, a gray suit, a wine-colored tie. And looking at me for the first time in many months, he said like a human being, "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I replied. And that thank you wasn't about him. We drove in silence. The city lights gilded the windows. The evening promised to be warm and long. The Levin estate greeted us with a manicured garden, washed paths. At the door, Margaret, slender in her blue dress. Her gaze flickered over my green dress. Her lips trembled slightly, not according to plan, but the smile remained in place. "Here you are," she said, kissing the air next to my cheek. "Everyone is already here." Victor came out of his study, hugged his son tightly. To me, a nod and a dry, "You look well," as if it were a surprise that required documentation. The living room shone with glass and silver on the tables, flowers, champagne, appetizers. And all this glitter, which I used to take for class, now seemed to me just a decoration. "Green. How brave." Emma approached, air-kissed me, and whispered like a secret, "Mom is having a quiet meltdown about the family photos. You know her obsession with color schemes." "There are more important things than the color in a photograph," I replied gently, taking a sip of champagne. Emma blinked, not expecting even such a mild deviation from the role of the convenient one. "By the way, did you look at that book? Ignite the Spark. They write about miracles in there." And again that vague hand gesture. "You know." "I saw it," I smiled politely. "I think Julian would find it interesting to read." Emma lost her script for a second but quickly returned to the role of the evening's hostess, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. Margaret called everyone to the table. Waiters deftly moved chairs. The glass clinked thinly. I sat between Timothy Sterling, that very business partner Victor wanted to talk to, and an elderly aunt who was most interested in making sure her glass was never empty. Across from me, Julian, the perfect son, the attentive host, the charming man. If you didn't know what was behind that facade, you could have believed it yourself. The first courses went by the book. Conversations flowed. Victor would occasionally throw out phrases to Timothy about a new project, synergy, prospects. Margaret was watching everyone as if this evening were an exam for everyone at once. I ate little. I couldn't taste the food. A tight knot was in my stomach, not from fear but from anticipation. When you're standing on the edge of a bridge, the scary part isn't jumping. It's standing there indefinitely. "Well then," Victor said, as the chocolate nut dessert, as ordered by Emma, was served. "Let's not just celebrate, but also rejoice in good news." He stood up, tapped his glass with a knife to quiet everyone, and looked at his son with that paternal admiration that requires no proof. "We have an announcement for you." He paused, took a sip from his glass, and smiled. "A very important one for Julian's future." At that moment, I felt the cold flash drive under my fingers in my bag, felt my phone vibrate slightly from an incoming message, and I felt everything inside me become quiet and clear, as if the room had filled with a different, transparent silence. I knew that in a minute I would have to stand up too. Victor stood up, his glass clinking against his knife. Everyone fell silent, expecting the usual. At the Levins, everything was a ritual. He paused, looking at his son the way fathers do when pride doesn't fit into words. "We have some joyous news. Sterling Capital is bringing Julian on as the director of marketing. The salary, the package, everything as it should be." Everyone applauded, as if on cue. Margaret was beaming. Emma was clapping. Timothy leaned towards Victor, clarifying something about synergy. They raised a toast to success, to the future, to family. And then Victor, as if in passing, threw out, "And of course to the fact that he is a husband who—" His gaze slid over to me with poorly concealed judgment. "Works tirelessly for his home." Julian stood up too. A practiced smile, a warm voice as if from the radio. "Thank you all for coming. And a special thanks to my beautiful wife, Barbara." He gestured to me with his hand, as if to an award on the wall, for putting up with my character, my late meetings, my demands, sometimes perhaps an excessive, he lowered his voice, businesslike manner. There were chuckles at the table. Someone exchanged a glance. The hint was understood. Margaret squeezed Emma's hand under the table. Poor son, how does he manage with her cold correctness? At that moment I stood up evenly without any trembling in my knees. I raised my glass and said calmly, I would also like to make a toast. To the truth. The silence immediately became different. Dense. Julian frowned. Barbara, not now. Now, I repeated evenly, and without rushing I took my phone out of my bag. The Levins had technology like a showroom, a large TV on the wall, quick access. With a single movement, I mirrored my phone screen to the television. On the black background, a simple folder named Family. Margaret was still smiling out of inertia, not understanding what was happening. Victor froze with his glass in the air. Over the last 6 months, about $50,000 has left our joint account for online gambling platforms. I opened the first tab. Here are the statements. Dates, amounts, recipients. On the screen were familiar columns, rows of debits, the logos of payment systems. A collective gasp went through the room. Emma took her hand away from her glass. This must be some kind of bank error, Julian said sharply. He took a step but didn't come closer. The errors repeat themselves month after month. I didn't even look at him. Next. I swiped. On the screen, neat and terrifying in its ordinariness, were confirmations of subscriptions. Monthly debits, welcome emails. Welcome to the premium level. Your activity hours. Average time, about 4 hours a day, I said without raising my voice. And this was during the weeks when, according to your family, I was being too cold. Someone dropped a fork. Margaret turned pale, pressing a napkin to her lips. Timothy Sterling stared at his plate as if it held the key to salvation. Victor slowly lowered his glass and sat down, like a man who has suddenly found it difficult to stand. Turn that off immediately, Julian hissed, his voice like metal. No. I was looking at the screen. For 2 years I was silent. Now I'm speaking. I swiped again. For a second, the logo of Quick Cash flashed on the screen, the title of the agreement in large print, the numbers and the address of their apartment. And now about our apartment, I said and tapped to open the document. The screen blinked, a white window opened. And at that second, Margaret's chair scraped back. Julian lunged for the remote and Victor, turning cold, stood up again. And this was only the beginning. The screen opened the agreement, and the most painful part became visible. The letterhead of Quick Cash. The address of their apartment, numbers that made you feel cold inside. About $150,000 against the property. Margaret moved away from the table, her fingers crushing a napkin. Victor leaned on the back of his chair as if he had suddenly lost his balance. This is a fake, Julian breathed and reached for the remote. Turn it off immediately. This is our home, I said calmly. And my signature is not on it. What was done behind my back is a crime. I swiped again and a correspondence opened on the screen. Marcus Thorne. The subject, payment schedule. Final notice. The lines were shorter than a breath. 50,000 by the end of the month. Otherwise we will escalate. You know the terms. The only thing that moved in the room was the sound of a glass being set down too sharply. Emma's face was white around her lips. Timothy Sterling looked away as if searching for an exit where there were only walls. This is not a topic for a family dinner, Margaret said quietly, but her voice trembled, and she gripped the edge of the table to hide the shaking. For 2 years I have been your topic for family hints, I replied just as quietly. Now it's my turn to call things by their names. One more swipe. Confirmations of appointments with Dr. Andrew Harrison. Emails. Confirming your appointment. Session summaries. Short dry phrases. Patient externalizes responsibility, describes wife as cold when presented with facts. Projection, resistance, barriers to therapy. I didn't read it aloud, just stated evenly. He's been in therapy for 4 months. And all this time, he has continued to pretend that I'm the one who needs fixing. Enough, Victor said. His voice had turned to stone. Julian, is this true? His son seemed to freeze from the inside out, and without looking at his father, he said through his teeth, "These are our private matters. She has violated everything she could have. I am protecting myself." I turned off the screen mirroring, placed my phone on the table, and looked at everyone. For 6 months, gambling platforms, adult subscriptions, hidden cards totaling 50,000, a lien on the apartment, a debt with Thorn. And all the while, jokes about my coldness at every one of your gatherings. I didn't come here for revenge. I came to tell the truth. Emma shrank in her chair, whispering, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said without anger. "It was more convenient for you to believe that I was too proper. It's calmer that way." Julian took a step towards me. His eyes were black as wet asphalt. "You've ruined my evening, my family, my reputation. You've been ruining it for 2 years bit by bit," I replied. I just turned on the light. Margaret, composing herself, tried to restore the usual order. "Barbara, let's talk later. You're an intelligent woman. There's no need for this." "There is a need." I took my bag. "And I also need to say this. I offered help, real treatment, finances under control, a lawyer for all the documents. If Julian is ready, I'm with him to the end. If not, I'm leaving." "Blackmail," he sneered, but the smile didn't hold. "A choice," I corrected him. "And it's not just mine." I turned to Victor and Margaret. "It will be painful for you, I understand. But the pain is not me. It's what you haven't wanted to see for a long time." "Where will you go?" Julian asked, coming to his senses, standing up straight. "Who needs you with your list of grievances?" "To myself," I answered simply. "Tonight to a friend's. Tomorrow to a lawyer's. On Monday, they will call you about separate financial protection. You wouldn't dare." "I already have," I said. "The joint cards and accounts are frozen. My money is safe. And yes, I will no longer be your lightning rod." Emma whispered to her mother, "Mom." Margaret stood up but sat back down again, turning pale. Victor stared at one spot, like a man who has aged several years in a single minute. Timothy Sterling looked away. Victor's business would clearly have a different agenda now. "Barbara," Victor finally called out, his voice a mixture of anger and a plea. This is not a conversation to be had in public. You're the ones who made them the public," I replied. "When you laughed when he made his jokes. No laughter today." I took my phone, turned off the wireless screen, checked the flash drive in an inner pocket, and looked up at Julian. Without hatred, without pity, just evenly. "If you're ready, I'll help. If not, you're on your own." He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. And in that empty silence, I turned towards the door. The living room was frozen like a photograph. Raised glasses, a cake with an inscription, strangers' faces on which, for the first time in a long time, there was not a single confident mask. In the hallway, as I was reaching for the doorknob, my phone vibrated quietly in my bag. I glanced at it. "Victor." A single short message without any greetings. "We need to talk. Not now, later. There's something you don't know." I looked at the screen, sighed, and pushed the door open. And then the warm evening, the courtyard, the path to the gate, a taxi waiting. And in the house behind me, I knew, a storm was about to break, so strong that the walls would seem to creak from the other people's voices. And yet, the most important thing was yet to be said, not there, but in what Victor was going to tell me later. That night, I didn't answer Victor. I went to a friend's, put my bag by the door, drank some water from the tap, and stood for a long time by the window, where the light from a streetlight fell in a stripe on the curtain. And inside it was not loud, not empty, just quiet, as it is after a loud noise when your ears are still ringing, but you already know that the worst is over because it has finally been said out loud. In the morning I called a lawyer, made an appointment, took the folder with the copies, and went. And for the rest of the day I went through the steps. A statement to the bank, letters to the microfinance company, a notification to the management company, a consultation with a police officer about the possible forgery of a signature. When all this was sorted out by evening, a second short message from Victor came. Not for excuses. For explanations. "Please. We met not right away, but 2 days later in a small cafe near the business center, where it turned out, he often had his morning espresso without Margaret, without their domestic glamour. He sat across from me, older as happens after a single evening, and the first thing he said was something I hadn't expected from him. "I'm sorry." Then he said the second thing. We all pretended that everything was right in our family, and for many years we closed our eyes to things we shouldn't have. Me first and foremost. He told me, briefly and dryly, without any attempt to complain, how Julian had lived on other people's approval since he was a youth, how he met every no with a workaround, how at home it was customary to save the beautiful picture at any cost, and how he, Victor, instead of setting a firm boundary, had for many years admired his son's resourcefulness. "We spoiled him and covered for him," he said, not looking at me. "And you were the only one who had to face the truth." He didn't justify his son, he didn't justify himself. And in that, strangely, it was easier to listen. The practical part of the conversation was short. He brought his lawyer, and together we discussed how to get me out from under the risks of the lien and the debts, how to formalize a separate property regime, how to document everything so that no one could replay it tomorrow. The issue with Marcus Thorne was resolved quickly. "Not heroism," Victor said. "Security." He arranged with the bank to refinance the black debt on normal terms, brought in his own people, and I was removed from all the agreements where I hadn't signed. I didn't thank him at length and with pathos. I just nodded and said, "Thank you for doing it in time." Because in all honesty, this is what a father should have done when he saw that his son was driving his family into a ditch, not the woman that son had chosen to practice his roles on. Then came the paper life. Applications, signatures, confirmations, a conversation with my bosses at work. Short, honest, without details. I took a couple of days off, then came back and put the whole routine back on track as always. Julian called several times. At first with claims, then with attempts at pity. Then he would apologize, get confused, say, "I'll start treatment for real." And I would listen without anger because anger had already done its work, but without hope because hope is not words but actions. A week later he did go into a treatment program, not to Dr. Harrison's for show, but to a place where they take your phone at the entrance. And there you can't close your eyes and you can't invent excuses. I didn't speak to Margaret for a long time. She wrote a short message. "I don't know how to look you in the eye." And I replied in the only way I knew how now, directly. Emma called unexpectedly, not right away, but after a couple of weeks, and spoke with a strange restraint, without her usual light mockery. She apologized for the books and the hints. She said that if I needed help with collecting documents, she would do it. And that was probably the first time I heard not a roll in her voice but a living person. Victor kept his word. We met a couple more times. He brought the notarized papers, and in one of our conversations, he admitted that he himself had had an episode with gambling a long time ago. Not a disaster, but enough to understand where it leads. And then, for the first time, I saw how the family's habit of glossing over everything had cultivated not strength in his own son, but the ability to hide. The divorce took its time. The court, the settlements, the paper moves, in which the main thing is not to rush and not to get emotional. I rented a small, bright apartment not far from my work, not with panoramic windows, but with ordinary ones, in which in the mornings you can see the janitor pulling a hose and the neighbors carrying a bag of bread. I bought an inexpensive table, hung a reproduction I had long wanted on the wall, and put a geranium on the windowsill, as simple as childhood. In the evenings I would unpack boxes and suddenly find myself smiling. For the first time in a long time, there were no expectations in the house, no one else's scripts, no need to prove anything. There was silence, a kettle, a blanket, and time that was mine. 6 months later in the morning, I was standing on the threshold of this apartment of mine with a cup of coffee, and the sun was falling on the white wall in such a straight, yellow rectangle that I felt both amused and warm at the same time, as if life was finally making simple things simple. An email came to my phone. The court's decision had come into effect. Everything was finalized. The division of property was complete. The debts to which they had tried to tie me were legally no longer my concern. Immediately after, An internal email from Westwood Capital Finance. I was being promoted to the level of executive director for how you held the processes during a difficult period. I read it, smiled, and felt not pride but calm. When you don't run from your truth, the world sometimes catches up with you right where you are. A short note came from Emma, with an apology and that same awkward warmth that you can't fake. From Margaret, an invitation to tea sometime. I left it unanswered for now because not all meetings have to happen right away. I only knew about Julian that he was really undergoing treatment, that it was hard for him, that he sometimes called his father and was silent. And perhaps that was the first honest conversation a man had with himself, where there are no jokes, no life-saving excuses. Victor once wrote, "We're holding on." And that we for the first time sounded not like the family against someone, but like people who have understood their share of the responsibility. Sometimes I thought I should feel triumphant, but something else came instead. A steady sense of a boundary. I no longer explain to other people that I'm fine. I don't prove that I'm not cold. I don't laugh at myself to make someone else feel better. I didn't become better. I stopped being worse than myself. And that, as it turned out, is enough to breathe freely. In the evenings, I started going to the pool. I learned to cook borscht from my mother's recipe, for myself alone. I bought a ticket to a small theater on an old street where the actors perform without microphones, and no one there knows me. And that is the happiness of a quiet order. The moral of this story is simple and in ugly words. As long as you are silent, you are used as a screen, as a lightning rod, as an excuse. The truth doesn't make things easier right away. Sometimes it breaks furniture and familiar connections. But only with it can you stop living in someone else's script. Love is not adjust to my defect and don't call it a defect. Love is when adults take responsibility for their own and don't dump someone else's on the head of the person next to them. And self-respect is not a slogan on a wall. It's a few concrete actions on the right day. Freeze the accounts, call a lawyer. Open the door and leave if you are being humiliated. I closed the door. The key clicked twice the way I like it. I put my bag by the door and thought, without pathos and big words, I don't have a happy ending. I have my beginning. One good morning, one honest truth, one choice after another. And if I am ever again offered to become someone's mask for someone else's weakness, I now know where my jacket hangs, where my flash drive is, and where my door is. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. Write the word truth in the comments if you watched to the end. It's important for us to know that our viewers watch the videos to the end. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us. There are more real-life stories ahead.